Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Roundup. I am your host, David Faux. With me, as usual, for now and evermore, due to our blood oath pact, is UberHansen. We are now fresh off of a preseason game, which played out exactly like you would imagine a preseason game to play out. You get really excited at first. You see a lot of names you recognize. And then 2 drives later, you're like, I am bored to tears, but I am still going to keep watching. Overall, it was about what you expected. It was fun. It was, then it got a little boring, and that's what it is. But that's life, and we're just glad to have football back in our lives. Uber, are you glad to have football back in your life?
Yeah, and gambling on football games is always fun. I'm a degenerate, so I gamble on preseason games. But yeah,
who among us?
yeah. So yeah, I love having football back. I miss watching the Bills, play football. So
yeah, it's just fun. It really is like kind of the perfect way to ease into football again. It's just like we're gonna give you a little taste. We're gonna get you a little something to make you feel good. It's not real, but it'll make you feel good. It is fun, and then you get the little progress, a little bit more each week, and then you finally get into the season, and then it's just faster than you always remember it being. But that's part of the fun. That's the fun. So we got stuff to talk about. We'll talk about the preseason game. We'll get to some news. Very recent drop today, like an hour ago, and we'll get into that. But the first thing that we are going to end up doing is just the usual ad read, and that is, of course, courtesy of our lovely friends at Underdog Fantasy. Folks, it is fantasy football season. And that means that you got drafts to do. You got lineups to make. And where else are you going to make it other than Underdog Fantasy? It's one of the leading, if not the leading, fantasy football site out there right now. It's the easiest place to play fantasy sports, period. Underdog lets you get all the best ball drafts. You get all the pick'em challenges in the game. If you use the promo code COVER1 when making your first deposit, you can have that deposit doubled up to $100. If you use promo code COVER1, again, it's the number one. You got to be at least 18 years old to sign up. This is just totally worth it. There's no other way of putting it. There's probably not that many places that are doing what Underdog Fantasy is doing. And if you don't take advantage of it, then I don't really know what to tell you. And we here at Cover One are very happy to always work with Underdog Fantasy. Again, use promo code COVER1, get $100 matched on your first deposit. Sign up today and start winning today. Thank you, Underdog Fantasy. Always a wonderful group to work with. So we're gonna just jump into some news first of all. So you're a this isn't news, but you're a preseason gambler.
Big time preseason gambler. Actually, I heard this is years ago. Actually, before gambling was even technically legal in New York State.
This is all hypothetical, by the way.
Yeah, very just hypothetical. That the Sharps make most of their money on preseason because it's the easiest way you can get information that the national public can't. So I actually think betting on preseason is smart. I don't necessarily suggest it to everybody. It is terrifying because the games never go the way you expect them to. But this week I saw
unless you're just betting on the Ravens to win straight up, then that seems like a pretty solid.
Yeah. And there's actually a prop bet. I saw a prop bet that's the Ravens go undefeated this preseason at plus 225, which isn't the greatest odds on earth, but they just don't ever lose in the preseason. So I guess it's free money if you want it.
Honestly, they genuinely care about that streak like more than they probably should. It would not surprise me if like they just act like if they get to their like third or fourth string quarterback and they're losing by 2 scores, they're like, hey, Tyler Huntley, go back in there. We need to win this game.
Sure.
But yeah, it's always funny. All right, so getting into actual news. So we'll talk about the first thing, which is the most recent thing, and that is as Rick Emerdy brings up here, Zeke Elliott is now signing with the New England Patriots. It is a 1-year deal. It's a maximum of $6 million, I believe.
Yep.
Which is interesting. Obviously not like a ton of money in the grand scheme of things, but probably a little bit more than people were expecting for Ezekiel Elliott at this point. Especially when you consider like who the Bills just brought in to kind of fill that type of role in Latavius Murray and, of course, Damian Harris, former Patriot. And it's very, very interesting. And we are also getting some news right now, literally right now, and that is Dalvin Cook is signing a 1-year deal with the New York Jets.
Okay.
Because I guess Breece Hall wasn't enough for them.
That's a weird one too. Like when they drafted Breece Hall, I was like, all right, well, that was a big guy Bills fans wanted. So be it. Mm-hmm. Michael Carter, the player of the year before, the rookie, was good. He was legitimately good.
He was a good player. I think he's a limited player. I wouldn't necessarily like build my running game around Michael Carter. And I think that him and Breece Hall really pair well together. But now you're adding Dalvin Cook to the mix, which I guess implies, at least to me, that like maybe they don't feel great about Breece Hall's recovery from his ACL tear, at least not right out of the gate. But like, I guess for the 1-year deal, it doesn't really matter that much. But like, I don't know. It's this is a little bit weird. Things are getting a little crowded. It's getting a little dream teamy in New York right now. It's kind of giving me those sorts of vibes. Which is, if I were okay, so Dalvin Cook is his 1-year deal worth up to $8.6 million with the Jets.
Wow, it's a lot of money to spend on a running back in this market.
Again, it's 1 year, so it's not like that big a deal, but also like that's a little odd. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit it on the head at the start here. Like that signifies to me that Breece Hall's not ready or will be ready really anytime soon. Because otherwise, why would you bring in Dalvin Cook? Like Breece Hall seemed pretty dang good last year. Like,
and it makes sense. I mean, it's the running back position. I mean, ACL is always going to be hard to come back in football, right? I mean, we talk about how much better recovery has been for ACLs, but really all we're saying is that like it's no longer like, oh, your career is basically over now. It's more like you will be able to recover in about a year, and a year after that you'll be at 100%. like you'll be back to the player you were. I mean, we saw this with Trey White last year, where it was like when he came back, it was very clear that he was not 100%. It was just that, he was ready to play. He was actually physically able to play, unlike being on the physically unable to play list or whatever. But to get that rhythm back, to get all those motions back, to get your confidence back, it takes time, and it takes actual game reps. And you saw as the season progressed, you saw Trey White come back and start to get more into form. In that playoff game against the Dolphins, you really saw that a little bit more, and even against the Patriots in the regular season finale. But I do think that with someone like Breece Hall, I mean, a running back, a rookie last year, it's tricky. It's very tricky. And plus, you also have to consider a new quarterback and a new offensive coordinator. It's a lot going on. And that's sort of the other thing, right? It's like Dalvin Cook has been with the Vikings before this year. His entire career was with the Vikings before now with the Jets. All sort of running that like wide zone style offense, whether it was with Stefanski or with O'Connell this year. Like, this is more or less the way that team has been with Dalvin Cook, is running that style of offense. And now you have Nate Hackett, who also has worked within that scheme, but like that's not really Nate Hackett's offense, right? Like he got hired by the Packers and Matt LaFleur, but that's not necessarily his offense, right? Like that's not that style of and in the grand scheme of things, it's the Aaron Rodgers offense, and that's going to be what comes first. But it also makes me wonder, like, so how confident are you that your running game is going to be so important that you felt the need to get Dalvin Cook after you got Breece Hall, who has an injury, and you have Michael Carter, and don't they have someone else? I feel like they have someone else that I'm forgetting about on that roster.
I believe they just drafted a running back.
Yeah.
This year.
Have you gotten to the Jets in your
Jets is next week.
Jets is next week. Okay. Yeah. So I'll consult with my producer right now to figure out exactly who they have.
I mean, in the meantime, like Zeke to the Pats, it really doesn't change anything to me on the Pats. Right. I actually think the Pats are better than most people think, but Zeke doesn't do anything. Dalvin to the Jets.
Like, the Zeke to the Patriots is very just like, okay, that's fine. Like he'll help, but whatever. So they have a couple of rookies. So they have Travis Dye, they have Israel Abanikanda, and Zonovan Knight, who's been on the team for a couple of years now. Like, this is not a team that's like devoid at the running back position, even if you take Breece Hall out of the equation. So I don't really get this whole move. It's just a little weird. It's a little weird.
Here's my question to you, because this is what I've been thinking about basically since Aaron Rodgers went over to the Jets is, I think his wide receivers are better because I think Garrett Wilson's better than Christian Watson. Like that's the upgrade there. So I give him the wide receivers being better. The offensive line's not better. It's significantly worse. And now I look at the running back room. Do I think Dalvin Cook and Michael Carter are better than Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon? I don't personally think they're better. So I still think in reality, Aaron Rodgers is playing with a lesser offense this year than he did last year. And he didn't do so well with that offense. So I kind of look at this like, where are we going here? How good is this offense really going to be? Is the Aaron Rodgers from last year who we're going to see this year, or we're going to see MVP Aaron Rodgers? And the Dalvin Cook thing doesn't really move the needle one way or another for me because they're still not better than the running backs he played with last season.
I mean, the Packers didn't necessarily get a ton out of A.J. Dillon last year, and Aaron Jones is and has been great as a receiver, and we saw that probably a lot more last year. I think in the running game in general, they were just kind of okay, kind of middling. But then again, that was just the Packers offense last year. I mean, that was just like the middle of the road offense in the NFL last year. It was just like, and now that I've said this multiple times, right? Of just like the Jets seem really hell bent on recreating the most middle of the road offense from last year and saying that this is going to take us to a Super Bowl. Now, here's the thing. If they had that offense last year, they probably would have had a deep playoff run because that defense was phenomenal. But expecting the exact same defensive results from year to year, that's a really tricky thing to ask for, because I mean, we've seen it with the Bills, right? I mean, from 2017 to I can speak. It's my job. 2017 to 2019. I mean, that Bills defense was really, really good. Great turnovers. Kept teams under clamps for the most part. But then in 2020, when the offense suddenly explodes and becomes amazing, those first half of the season for the Bills defense was not great. I mean, they weren't terrible. It's not like they were giving up tons of, points or whatever, but it was not what we had expected coming into that season. I think we were all expecting the Bills defense to still be good, and for the offense to just like, okay, as long as it's good enough, I think we'll be okay. And then the offense becomes this juggernaut that's almost unstoppable. And then the defense took a little bit of a step back. They had some issues and injuries, etc. But like, you expecting defense, especially like great top tier defense, which the Jets were last year, to carry over year to year is asking a lot. There's just so much variance. I mean, just turnovers in general, right? Turnovers are a huge variant thing. It's not like entirely random, but it is like mostly random. I mean, there are teams that generally are pretty consistent with getting turnovers, but Actually, that's a good question. Were Saleh's defenses, was that Jets defense last year a very turnover heavy defense? It didn't seem like they were.
I think they just held teams to, very few points.
Yeah.
But I think also a byproduct of having a really bad offense is your defense gives up less points. Like the Jets defense is very, very good. Like, don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
They were elite last year. I expect them to still be very good this year, but you're going to see some level of regression just because in theory, Aaron Rodgers should be better than Zach Wilson was. The Jets should score more points. And if your team scores more points on offense, it's more likely than not that the defense is going to give up more points because teams are chasing, not running clock. So I'm interested to see just how good the Jets defense is again this year. I mean, I don't think Sauce Gardner is going to get worse. I don't think Quinnen Williams is going to get worse. Like, there's players that are going to be just as good, but then you look at someone like, is CJ Mosley going to be very good again this year, or is he getting older and that's going to start to tail off? Are the edge rushers going to get the pressure that you want? Like, Carl Lawson's already battling injuries again. Like, there's a lot with the Jets that's really interesting on defense. The offense, to me, kind of like you were saying earlier, it just seems kind of meh. Like, it's going to be better than last year, but it's people are acting like it's this juggernaut offense. I don't see that.
It'll be better than last year because it just has to be, right? It's almost impossible for that offense to be worse than it was last year. It would boggle my mind if that were the case. But expecting it to be something that's like dangerous or really difficult to stop, I don't see that happening. And part of that is just because Aaron Rodgers is who he is at this point of his career, and he's 40 years old, and obviously a better quarterback than Zach Wilson is, and probably ever will be. But like, what exactly is that giving you at this point? And then you have the fact that it's Nate Hackett. I mean, I refuse to believe in Nate Hackett. I can't get over this. I'm not going to move past this. We saw first of all, Bills fans have seen what Nate Hackett can and can't do, right? Like, I'm flabbergasted by the fact that he keeps getting a job, except for the fact that I'm not, because it's the NFL and it doesn't really matter how good you are at your job or not. But he goes from Buffalo to Jacksonville, follows his buddy Marone. Then Marone throws him under the bus to try and save his job, and then Hackett ends up going to the Packers. It's Aaron Rodgers, whatever, and Matt LaFleur seems to have a really good offensive brain in himself. And LaFleur was the one calling the plays, right? In Green Bay?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. So wasn't play calling there, gets the Denver job. And I mean, just a disaster from week one. Nothing about that offense ever made any sense. Nothing about the offense was in sync or working off of each other. It was so disjointed and strange and weird, and they couldn't even get out of the huddle in time to beat the play clock. I mean, they got to the point where the Denver fans are like counting down the play clock so they don't get another delay of game. What are we expecting to have happen here with the Jets? I don't.
He's Adam Gase. That's who Nate Hackett is. They have the same trajectory.
No. Adam Gase is way better than this. Adam Gase is a weird. Actually, no. Adam Gase and Nate Hackett are like bizarro versions of each other. Adam Gase is like I think a actual smart football mind, not a great one. I think he kind of oversimplifies and dummies his quarterbacks down too much. But then again, other than Peyton Manning, what good quarterback has he worked with? I think he just sort of feels the need to dumb it down for them after working with Peyton Manning. But with Gase, it was always like his personality, the way he handled things was always a turnoff for people, right? It was and Peyton Manning has endorsed and re-endorsed Adam Gase as a great football mind many times over the years. What I've never heard with Nate Hackett, what I've always heard with Nate Hackett rather is he's a great guy, great person to be around, such a great guy. What I've never heard is he's a great coach. He's a great offensive mind. He knows what he's doing. He's got this up his sleeve. I've never, ever heard that about Nate Hackett. I've always heard what a great guy he is, and he sure seems like one. God bless him. But like, I don't get it. I don't get what I'm supposed to be like deathly afraid of with the Jets other than Garrett Wilson. on offense.
This Jets, they could humble me too. Like we could be doing this show here in the middle of November and be like, geez, the Jets they're juggernauts. That's
Listen,
feasible. I don't think it happens. It's feasible.
As I have often said, I am always right, except for all the times when I'm wrong, which is often, right? Like the very first thing, if you go to my Twitter right now, @DFoxy, you will see the first thing I have in my bio is I know nothing about football. And that's a genuine thing because, like, the more you learn about the game, the more you realize you don't know anything about this game. It's a very deep, strange, complex, complicated game that requires constant learning and attention to it. And it's possible that as I'm sitting here right now, I'm blathering off absolutely nothing because maybe the Jets do turn into a legitimately good offense and maybe they do end up going to the Super Bowl. I have no idea how things are going to play out. But, like, I also know something about football and I know what makes good teams. I know what makes good players. There's good players on that Jets offense, but it doesn't feel like a cohesively great offense. It's just a little strange and a little mishmashed and a lot of like, hey, this is someone who Aaron Rodgers has played with. Let's get him on the team. And then you add in Dalvin Cook, even though your running back room is pretty crowded. It's just a little odd. This has turned into a very anti-Jets podcast very quickly. This has nothing to do with the Bills or the Colts, but that's okay. It's just, this is what happens when you have news break in the middle of your show. You get off on long tangents about crap.
Shall we go into the Bills?
I guess, if we have to. Anyway, so Bills Colts Saturday. Pretty good start, I would say, and it was an interesting start because you got to see the Bills on defense first, which meant we got to see Sean McDermott as a play caller again. Which is the first time that he's done it in a full-time capacity since Carolina, when he was the defensive coordinator under Ron Rivera. And those defenses with Ron Rivera were generally pretty good, and that's the benefit of having guys like Star Lotulelei in his prime, and K'Wan Short in his prime, and Luke Kuechly, and Thomas Davis. Like, there were some really good players on that defense. There were also some not-so-great players that they elevated to a higher level. I mean, we've talked about, some of the, like he's done here in Buffalo, taking no-name DBs and turning them into amazing Pro Bowl caliber players. He did that in Carolina. He did it in Buffalo. And what's interesting is when Leslie Frazier decided to step back from football, the Bills seemed to be in agreement that they weren't expecting him to do that, first of all, and they felt that because of that, they were just sort of expecting him to be the defensive coordinator this year, and that this wasn't like a forcing out of Leslie Frazier. It was really just him taking a step back from the game. And when you look at the Bills and the fact that Frazier had been on this team since McDermott has gotten there, and that they're both defensive-minded coaches, I think the general assumption was that, especially since they both came from that Jim Johnson tree, that since McDermott never really intervened all that much with how Frazier ran his defense, this was not going to create a lot of changes going from Frazier to McDermott. And I think this very first preseason game is evidence that that's not the case so much. You saw a little bit of different looks on defense. You saw a little bit more crowding of the box on defense. You saw more blitzing. It was definitely, you could see a very clear difference between last year's defense and this year's defense just in those couple of plays, right? I mean, at least to me, it seemed like it was.
Yeah, as I was watching it on my phone, because that's the only screen I had access to that had the game on it, I will say the one thing I did see is the box is crowded. Like, I saw that consistently, and I think that helped to generate pressure. Like, people, the Colts didn't know where the pressure was going to come from. Was Matt Milano going to come flying up? He's spying Anthony Richardson. Is he going to just blitz up? Or are you just going to have these weird stunts with the defensive end and D tackles? The Bills' defensive line absolutely dominated that game. And I think part of it was the way that they were basically presenting themselves to the Colts, who the Colts have actually, I know last year's bad offensive line, but they actually have a decent offensive line. It's not like it's a garbage
They
line.
have a
like
talented offensive
Yeah.
line. They have a talented one.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you see a little bit of what McDermott's going to do, but I also will caution he's not going to give anything away until that Jets game.
Right.
I think there's so many more tricks up his sleeve that he's waiting to show Aaron Rodgers and now Dalvin Cook. And I think we'll see a lot of them on that first game of the season.
I 100% agree. I think that he wants to, run sort of the basics of the defense, get the real, floor down as best he can during the preseason. But I mean, just like any other coach, right? Like you're saving stuff for the regular season. You're doing different stuff for the regular season. I guess the difference would be that with someone like Leslie Frazier, a lot of that floor or a lot of, sort of what they did for stuff in the preseason was probably most of what you saw in the regular season too, because Leslie Frazier was a very, we're going to stick in this defense. We're going to rush 4. We're going to win with 4. We'll blitz on occasion and we'll divvy up different looks on how to blitz and all that sort of stuff. But for the most part, this is a very soft, back off, kill him with 1,000 paper cuts type of defense, bend, don't break, that sort of thing. But with McDermott, it's going to, I feel like pretty clearly and quickly become a much more pressure-oriented defense. And it won't be something in the, vein of like a Vance Joseph, who is literally a live by the blitz, die by the blitz type of defensive play caller. But I do think he's going to be different than Leslie Frazier. I think that was pretty evident on Saturday. It was kind of cool to watch. It was pretty exciting. And something that I thought about when I was watching the starters in particular was it seemed to me that Micah Hyde was playing a little more closely to the line of scrimmage and maybe even up to the line of scrimmage, which, before he came to Buffalo and became one of the best deep coverage safeties in the NFL, he was this sort of just like jack of all trades, movable piece for the Packers and their defense with Dom Capers. It would be interesting to see if they go back to that maybe a little bit in like certain situations. Obviously, you don't want to take one of the best deep cover safeties away from the deep part of the field just to kind of mess around with him because he did it before at a different team. But I do think that that's something you can use as a changeup, to really create different looks for the offense. So I'm excited to see what happens with that.
Yeah, and if you start playing Hyde more in the box, like it tends to be that Hyde stays that deep guy. Poyer's the guy that runs up. Maybe Poyer's on the blitz. Maybe Poyer enters the box. Hyde will stay deep. If the Bills are essentially just switching those, like doing it whenever, kind of almost at random, but not really at random, it just makes the quarterback's jobs harder. Try to identify the one that's going to move forward and find the one that's going to go back. It's just another read you have to make after the snap that the Bills can kind of play with quarterbacks in that way.
Yeah. The more reads, the more conflicts you can create, the more chaos you can create essentially on defense. And I think that's what they're probably trying to do with this. So that was really exciting for me. The other thing that seemed to be really interesting, so I talked about this a little bit in the recap, was that James Cook touchdown was great. And part of what I loved about it was the fact that when he makes that cut, I mean, it's immediate, right? Like it's not like a hop step and then cut back outside. It was he read the block right off of Sherfield and Knox, right? They were both on the edge there, kind of crashing down, making sure that was sealed off. As soon as he saw that develop, he didn't hesitate. He didn't think about it. He said, "That's what it needs to look like, and that's where I'm gonna go." That's the difference between year 1 and year 2 in my mind for a lot of players. It's just like this is what we talk about when the game starts to slow down. You see things develop and you're no longer thinking about it. You're just reacting to it. You're going and you're moving at 1,000 miles an hour. You're doing what the play is designed to do instead of just sort of like thinking about it. And then, if you're talented enough, you can kind of get away with thinking about it for, half a second or whatever. But now that you're a second year in and you're same offense, a lot of the same players, you're doing things that are now familiar to you. And that's sort of what allows you to move quickly and do things quickly. And I'm excited to see how James Cook continues to develop in year 2.
And it's a great point that I didn't even think of while I was watching the game. Is I now look back at James Cook the first few weeks of last season, right? He was so hesitant and it was so frustrating. He just approached the line so slow, and he wouldn't just. It's just like go.
It's Le'Veon Bell. It's Le'Veon Bell syndrome. All these guys now have watched Le'Veon Bell when they grew up, and now they're like, oh, gotta dance around the hole 5 times before hitting a gap.
Yeah, and with the Bills' offensive line, that really doesn't particularly work, and that's why Singletary took the job early in the season, is because Singletary knew I got to just hit the hole, because if I hit the hole, I'm going to get 3 yards. If I don't, I'm going to get stuffed in the backfield for a 5-yard loss or something. But another part of this James Cook kind of storyline, or this James Cook touchdown that you brought up that I love, is Trent Sherfield was a key on that block. And Trent Sherfield is going to be so important to the Bills this season, not just as a like pseudo extra slot receiver, which he's decent out of that position. He almost put up over 500 yards with Tua, but he's a great blocking receiver. He can also play gunner on special teams. Like he's a jack of all trades. And that's why he's going to get playing time over other guys that aren't as good at blockers, aren't as good at in these other roles. And I'm sure we'll probably talk about one of the wide receivers who had a decent game. But I think he's behind Sherfield because of this.
Before we get to the wide receivers, because they're going to be tied into this as well, quarterbacks, right? Like, so they, on offense, they went with Kyle Allen for the start of the game and struggled for a bit there, seemed to start to find a rhythm, and then he threw a pick 6, right? Like it was not Kyle Allen's best showing. And then of course Matt Barkley comes in and does exactly what Matt Barkley does every single preseason, and just does exactly what he needs to do in order to keep that job for the rest of his life if he wants to. It's so, and you know, the other thing with preseason, especially quarterbacks, is you see some of these guys and people get all excited, like, oh, you know, this guy can do this guy can do that. It's like, guys, it's preseason. Most of these guys are not in the NFL for the next 3 years. Like, you just bring it back. Like, there's a reason Matt Barkley has been a backup for this team multiple times and doesn't get a lot of playing time. Even when Josh Allen is hurt. I mean, they weren't ready to throw out Josh Allen there. Even when Case Keenum was here. Case Keenum's a better quarterback than Matt Barkley is. Let's just be very clear, very honest about that. And I think that, you know, it seems unless something really changes in the next 2 preseason games and Kyle Allen plays super well, I think you're looking at a Matt Barkley QB2 yet again, which is whatever. It honestly doesn't really matter.
That's the thing, is it doesn't matter. This is why the whole QB2 discussion on Twitter has been one of the more exhausting discussions I've ever seen. It's like this position does not matter for the Bills. It doesn't. If Allen gets hurt, God forbid, the season's over. Like it doesn't matter who's playing quarterback at that point. So if Matt Barkley beats out Kyle Allen, fine. If Kyle Allen beats out Matt Barkley, fine. Like it's such an inconsequential thing for me, but it was a weird thing because when the Bills signed Kyle Allen, everyone just assumed guaranteed QB2, that Matt Barkley has no chance, which to be fair, I did from the start did not buy. I was like, Barkley can beat out Allen. If you go back and look at their numbers, they're not starkly different. Like Kyle Allen doesn't clear Matt Barkley. I mean, Barkley right now is in the lead, but it could change. You know, we'll see.
Yeah, I think that it's just it's a pointless thing to get like super worked up about, right? Like it is what it is. And if Josh Allen goes down, that's like, I don't really care who's the second quarterback is, because it's not going to matter, right? Like you're not. I'm sorry, but you're not winning a Super Bowl with Matt Barkley. You're just not.
I mean, the Bengals have Jake Browning. The Chiefs have Blaine Gabbert. Like, you kidding me? Like, all these great teams know that if their QB1 goes down, it's over. Yeah. Like, so it's just not a position
So then the rest of the quarterback room is not really about, oh, well, will this guy win games for us? It's like, no, that doesn't matter. What we need is somebody who's going to like help us week to week help with,
Mhm.
communicating things to the rest of the team, communicating things, helping the second team and scout team, whatever, run their thing and all that sort of stuff. It's all sort of behind the scenes, inside football type of stuff. It's not anything to do with how that particular quarterback plays on the field because, God forbid, they don't, right? Like they're just not going to.
For sure.
So with that said, it was not all the quarterback's fault. There were a lot. I was reminded on Saturday just how many receivers there are on this team because I feel like almost every single one of them got at least one catch, except for one who seemed to be a bit of a glaring obvious omission, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But there were a lot of receivers that played on Saturday. Were there any in particular that stood out to you?
I mean, we already talked about Sherfield, but I'll bring up a Khalil Shakir because people on Twitter think I'm a Khalil Shakir hater, which I am. I am absolutely not a Shakir hater. He had two great catches, like almost back to back. I think like these great hand catches that you look at and you say, "Yeah, that's really good," and then he just drops an easy ball. And that's the frustrating thing with Shakir. People always want to talk about Gabe Davis dropping the ball. Shakir had just as bad of drop issues last season, and people just forget about that. But Shakir kind of, again, solidified himself to me as this great depth piece on this team that the Bills can say, if one of our outside guys go down, we can put him on the outside. If one of the slot guys go down, Sherfield, Hardy, Kincaid, one of those guys, we can put him in the slot. So Shakir had a good enough game to me where I said, yeah, he's exactly where I think he is. And he looks like he's getting better. And those hands they're beautiful when he makes the catch, but they look ugly as hell when he doesn't.
Yeah, I think that. Okay, so with that said, do you feel comfortable in calling Khalil Shakir wide receiver 5 with Diggs, Davis, Hardy, and then Sherfield is 4, and then Shakir is 5?
I have Shakir as 5. I still don't know if he's going to be a game day active or not. You can't play special teams unless you're talking punt return or you're talking kick return, which I think Deontay Hardy is a better option there. Shakir being a wide receiver 6, you got to play special teams if you're wide receiver 5-6. Like you have to. So I don't really know where he's going to fit if that's the case.
Yeah, it is. It's very hard to be a depth wide receiver and not be able to play special teams other than return. And he's only okay at being a returner. Like there's only so much value he brings outside of that. And it's tough to make a roster that way. It just is. And so when you look at some of these other guys, right, like Keyshawn Johnson and Andy Isabella, right? I mean, the thing with, to me, a lot of these guys like Keyshawn Johnson, Tyrell Shavers, who was one of the other guys? There were so many guys that caught passes on.
Marcel Aitman.
Marcel Aitman. That is exactly who I was saying. They all had a couple of catches, and they were all like, "Oh, okay, that was pretty good." Mm-hmm. But then they all sort of seem to be relatively the same, except for Andy Isabella, who is very clearly different for a reason. I mean, Andy Isabella was a second-round pick, and he was a second-round pick for a reason. He's a fast, shifty little dude. And there's been a role for that type of player on this team before, in this type of offense. And they certainly have one right now that they paid quite a decent amount of money to in Deontay Hardy. But if Deontay Hardy also has to be the return guy for the foreseeable future, and has Andy Isabella been a return guy when he was with Arizona?
So I looked this up. He really wasn't ever. He had a couple of returns in the NFL, but he's not a return guy. Like that's a narrative that has been created about him. But
because he wasn't even really
fast, right? Like, he wasn't even that like he didn't even really do it in college. So they tried him at it in this game. I thought he looked awful on the return. He just didn't really know what he was doing, which isn't his fault. It's not what he does. He looked really good as a wide receiver, though.
He did look good as a wide receiver. In fact, he looked really good. I mean, it was kind of like, oh, okay, so like you've got there's a reason you're here, right? Like I mean, this is not Andy Isabella is not a camp body. Like this is somebody that could realistically like be fighting for a spot on this team. But again, with Shakir, if you don't bring value on special teams, then that's going to be a little bit trickier. It's very interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see how this wide receiver room shakes out. There's so many options, and it's not clear cut at the moment. And maybe it becomes a little bit more defined as we move through the rest of the preseason. I mean, Tyrell Shavers, from what I had heard coming into the game, was having a really good camp. And he ended up making some pretty good catches throughout the game as a whole. He also had a couple of really bad drops.
Yeah.
It was I felt bad after a certain point of just like, what are you supposed to do in that scenario? Especially when at least for me, I kept hearing like, oh, he's having a great camp. He could really be competing for a spot. And then he just has these drops, and then he comes back and makes a touchdown catch. And it's like, all right, you got to be more consistent than that, because obviously you can do something. You have the ability to do something as a depth player, but no one's going to care about that if you just aren't reliable catching the football. You have to be able to do that.
And he's well regarded coming out of college as a great special teams player. Like that was one of the big things on him, is he's a really, really good special teams player. He can do that in the NFL. So this kind of goes back to the Shakir thing. And I'm not saying Shavers is going to beat out Shakir for a roster spot, but Shavers has an easier path than a lot of other guys to make this team, because at the end of the day, if he's an okay wide receiver, but he's a great special teams player, there's a role for him on a game day, even if he's never going to see the field as a wide receiver.
Right. And this is sort of something that will probably end up getting lost in a lot of the conversations on cutdown day. If someone like Tyrell Shavers stays on the roster and someone like an Andy Isabella or Khalil Shakir ends up getting cut, is everyone's going to be like, oh, well, Tyrell Shavers just drops the ball all the time. Khalil Shakir is this. Andy Isabella can be this. Blah, 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 blah. It's like it's when you're 4th, 5th, 6th on the depth chart for your position, got to be more than what your position says you are, basically. Which it might not sound like the most fair thing in the world, but you're not going to have other guys playing that spot, and you need to be able to be a good special teams player. You need to be able to do a lot of different things, and if you can't, limits my reasons for keeping you on this team. And you gotta find a way to work around that. All right. So just real quick, who do you feel is making this roster at wide receiver right now? Obviously, this is subject to change.
I mean, Diggs, Davis, Sherfield, Hardy, right? I think those 4 locks like that, they're going to make it. I think Shakir's going to make it. He just, like I said, I like the versatility outside, inside. And then it gets kind of weird after that. Like Justin Shorter, is he a thing? The Bills spent a 5th round pick on him. Do they really want to try to get him through waivers to practice squad? Like, do they want to kind of sit him on the inactive? And not to keep talking about special teams, but Shorter can play special teams. So I right now would put him in. But if Andy Isabella has a couple more good games, the Bills might say, hey, this guy might deserve a spot, and we'll have to figure out the special teams thing later. Justin Shorter, you didn't show us enough. But I think it's too soon. I got to see 2 more games, or at least 1 more.
It is interesting because Shorter did play on offense. He just was like the only person they never threw to. And he was on the first team. He was running with the first team on some of those reps. It's just that never got the ball thrown to him, which is, it is what it is. But, I if I'm looking for something in this week's preseason game against the Steelers, that's something I'm looking for, is like, where's Justin Shorter and why is he not getting the ball, just to see what he can do? I mean, like, bare minimum, that's what you want. Like, maybe he just drops the ball a ton. Okay, well, we still need to see if he does or doesn't do that in a game. Like, if you're just not thrown to, then that's a tricky thing, at least from our perspective on the outside, to be like, well, who is this guy, right? Like, it's tricky to try and figure that all out. But obviously, there's 2 other games to work through, and they have the most knowledge about it because they're with him every day and they see the practices and all that sort of stuff. So Justin Shore is one of those storylines for me going into the Steelers game. Offensive line. So an interesting lineup to start, right? So you have Dawkins, McGovern, and Morse, like we expected. Mm-hmm. Spencer Brown at right tackle, and then Osiris Torrance, rather, at right guard. And then Ryan Bates was the second team center. Kind of interesting. Torrance, I felt, was fine based on, the couple of times where I just sort of looked at what the offensive line was doing. It seemed like he was fine. He wasn't necessarily like, throwing people around or, tossing people out the club or anything like that. But also with offensive line in general, if no one really notices what the offensive line is doing, you're probably doing pretty good. So with no like major pressures coming against, and again, he was working with Kyle Allen, who is not the most fleet of foot or elusive quarterbacks in the NFL. So that, it presents its own challenge, and playing with Josh Allen also presents its own challenges. That's an offensive lineman at times. But it seemed like Torrance played pretty well. And especially in your first NFL action against the Colts defense, it's not like he was going against DeForest Buckner. He wasn't active in this game. The Colts defensive line is what it is. It's not like world beaters or anything. But regardless of that, he seemed to be decently comfortable doing what he needs to do, and it was pretty good. It's a good encouraging sign for your second round rookie to have a spot like that in his first action.
Yeah, and he graded out really well. Not that I put much stock into, Pro Football Focus, but they had him ranked as the Bills' best graded pass protector. So that's, I guess, at least a good sign, I would think. Yeah. But yeah, Torrance running with the first team, I think that's significant. It's not just the Bills are giving him a shot with the first team. I think the Bills are saying, like, yeah, you're probably the right guard. Bates is our swing guy everywhere. Bates will be the center, the guard. Hell, Bates might even be the swing tackle for all I know. So, which I think it's good to have a player like Bates on your team. Most people don't have a player that can play all those positions and play it to an average level, a slightly below average level in the NFL.
Most NFL teams don't have any sort of offensive line depth, period. Most teams can barely field an offensive line that they feel comfortable with. Like, it's hard to get a good starting five in the NFL right now at offensive line. Like, I think teams sort of look at like the Eagles and are like, oh, that's the goal. It's like, no, that's like being on Mount Olympus, right? Like that's like that does not generally exist in the NFL. You don't have multiple Hall of Fame guys on your offensive line in the NFL most of the time. And when you look at other teams, like, even Kansas City, right? Like, they have, even last year, just like 3 really great offensive linemen on the interior. And then left tackle was Orlando Brown, who has his pluses and he has his minuses. And at right tackle, it was Andrew Wiley, who, like, he's nothing special. Like when you look at like contributors who really helped the Chiefs win the Super Bowl, it's like nobody's thinking of Andrew Wiley at right tackle and being like, that was one of the biggest differences in beating the Philadelphia Eagles and winning the AFC and being one of the best teams in the NFL. It's like, he was there. Good for him for being there. But he also got his ass whipped by Von Miller in week 6 when they played against the Bills. It is what it is. And like, you can survive in the end. You can do what you need to do in the NFL if someone like Andrew Wiley is your weakest link, because he's not the worst right tackle in the world. He's just sort of whatever. But when you have somebody who is not that good at right tackle, and you have somebody at, hypothetically speaking, let's say left guard, just being turnstiles all game long, that becomes a problem, because you don't also have like elite level guys around those two to make it work. I mean, I like Deion Dawkins. He's not an elite level left tackle, He's a good left tackle who brings a lot of leadership and has been a mainstay for this team for a long time. I like Mitch Morse a lot. I think he's probably, relative to his position, probably the best offensive lineman on this team, I would say. They ask him to do a lot, and again, brings a lot of leadership. But he's also not Jason Kelsey or Creed Humphrey or someone of that caliber. He's probably a tier below that, which is fine. That's a good center. That's a good offensive lineman to have in the NFL. But again, like you're not talking about elite level players. I wouldn't say that there's an elite level offensive lineman on this team right now. There also doesn't need to be. As long as there is a cohesiveness and a floor that is attainable, that isn't going to be detrimental to this team, that's what we're looking for. Because last year, that was not what was going on. It was Roger Saffold was well over the hill at that point. Really could only be useful as a run blocker, and they didn't run the ball enough to really make use of that and become that type of team where that was a worthwhile thing. And then with Spencer Brown dealing with his back recovery and, again, with Spencer Brown, it was a lot of projection from his rookie year where we saw flashes because of his athleticism. And then in year 2, it was like, all right, well, now he's hurt, which limits his athleticism. So what are we getting here? And then you bring in Dave Questenberry, who also was fighting an injury for a lot of the season as well. When he had to come in, it was just a mess. The right tackle was just a mess. So hopefully health remains like a clear and fine thing, right? Like hopefully they're not quite as banged up as they were, and you don't have as many guys playing through injuries as they were. And you just hope that the floor is raised. We're not looking to blow teams off the ball. We're not looking to attack the Jets and just sort of destroy that elite level defensive line or anything like that. Just be normal, be okay. Just be a team that is not going to put your $250 million quarterback in a bad position.
Yeah, I the more and more I research other teams' depth charts and realize how a lot of this stuff works, the more and more I find myself believing and agreeing with the concept that your offensive line is only as good as the worst player on your offensive line, which is so different than other position groups, right? I think you can have a very good wide receiver core if you have one great wide receiver. You can't do that on offensive line. So the Bills last year struggled so much because Roger Saffold was essentially a turnstile and Spencer Brown was struggling. And it didn't matter how good Mitch Morse was or Deion Dawkins was. They had such holes in other spots that essentially those players, Mitch Morse and Dawkins, had to fill in for them when they got blown up and blown back into Josh Allen's lap. I look at somebody like the Dolphins, for instance, just to throw this out there. Teron Armstead's one of the best left tackles in football. But the guy next to him, Liam Eichenberg, is probably the worst left guard in all of football. So that makes their offensive line horrendous. There's a giant hole there. And for the Bills this season, the hope is Connor McGovern or Osiris Torrance. One of those two is better than Roger Saffold was, and Spencer Brown elevates his game. If that happens, then the Bills' offensive line is automatically better because you've reduced your worst player. You've increased your worst player to a higher level. That's what we're hoping for with the Bills, I think. And Osiris Torrance, starting at right guard, he could be a massive catalyst to making this entire offensive line significantly better.
And what's interesting is putting Torrance at right guard or starting Torrance at right guard for this game. Do you think in the mind of the Bills staff, in their minds, do you feel like there is concern about putting a rookie next to Spencer Brown, who's only in his third year and, has struggled throughout his time, as opposed to maybe going with a veteran like Ryan Bates, who's played tackle, who's played guard, who's played center, does a lot of different things? Is that a thought that would probably go through their mind? I mean, probably at least a little bit.
I mean, if you're gonna attack the Bills week 1, if you're the Jets, you're going right between Torrance and Brown. If that's the case, that's the gap you're identifying. And yeah, you're right. Maybe that is in their heads, but maybe there's also a plan. I mean, Torrance on the right side, he's there for a reason. He's just this giant body that's supposed to stuff that hole and make sure no one
drafted Torrance for a reason.
Yes.
But with putting them together, it's a tricky situation because you want to be able to give a player who seems to be playing well in O'Cyrus Torrence reps, and especially early on, you don't want to just like stagnate your rookie for no reason. But putting your rookie next to a right tackle who hasn't played all that well in his first couple of years, it's a tricky thing to try and sell to me. I mean, it really is. And I don't know. It's also possible that maybe they just rotate, especially early on, Bates and Torrance together. And I think that's fine too. I think that's perfectly fine to do. And maybe they do a right tackle rotation. I don't know. Like it kind of depends on who they have. Like I don't think they would rotate Brown and Quessenberry, right? Like that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Maybe Shell and Brown, but also like but like Brandon Shell is a good run blocker, or at least a pretty decent run blocker, and Spencer Brown has shown ability as a run blocker as opposed to as a pass protector. So I don't really see a point in rotating them either. So I would be fine with a right guard rotation, right? I think that would be fine as long as everyone sort of feels comfortable with that situation.
I wonder, and I just looked this up because I didn't remember correctly. So Ryan Bates is a slightly undersized, slightly light guard.
Yeah.
Per RAS, MathBond's RAS, where Torrance is a massive right guard, right? He's a gigantic human.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's some sort of benefit the Bills see there. Maybe Cromer sees where he's like, I can put this massive human next to this freak athlete instead of having two freak athletes next to each other. Maybe there's some sort of, conflicting abilities when you have two similar guys at right guard and right tackle, as opposed to two very starkly different humans and athletic Spencer Brown and just human wall O'Cyrus Torrence.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. There's part of me that wonders, since they started O'Cyrus Torrence in the first game in the preseason, it would not surprise me if they start Ryan Bates at right guard against the Steelers. I think that sort of seems like something they would do, to just sort of see like, all right, he got his reps with the starting team, seemed to go well. Let's see what we have again with Ryan Bates. We kind of know what we have with Ryan Bates. That's why he's on this roster. But let's sort of see how this shakes out this week versus last week. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And that's definitely something I'm going to be focused in on. I might even try and watch back the Colts game again to see focus a little more on Torrance and also see Bates at center, because he had one snap that was high. But other than that, everything else seemed fine with him at center, which makes sense. He's been at center before for this team when Mitch Morse has gone down, and not often though. I think they also had Feliciano at center, which never made sense to me. But
Van Roten.
Oh God. Jeez. Another example of what we're talking about when we say teams are struggling to get a starting 5 offensive linemen out there. God bless him for having a career, but Greg Van Roten is not it. I mean, yeah. Was there anything else that stood out to you from this game, from a roster perspective, just from a game perspective, anything?
I mean, Damar Hamlin, right? Like, we got to talk about that. Yeah. Like that's still one of the most remarkable stories I think ever in sports. Like, to go from where we were on January 2nd to August 11th or whatever date this was, and he's playing football again, like making tackles. It's phenomenal. I was kind of watching him, trying to see if I saw any hesitation going into tackles, because that was my biggest concern. That would signify, he's mentally struggling. He's physically there, but is he mentally there? There was a couple plays where I thought I saw that. I had actually reached out to the Cover One guys in the chat, and most everyone was like, they didn't see that. So my mind was probably playing tricks on me, which just makes it, the Hamlin stories, it's unbelievable. And like every single time I think about it, I get a little emotional, actually. So
it's one of the just most crazy stories in sports that I can remember, that first of all, that actually has to do with football. But it's also just like I can't imagine being in that position and then just going back and playing football again. I mean, that would when we talk about what you just said with maybe not mentally all being there, I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't be. If I almost died from this, yeah, I probably wouldn't be all there either. I certainly wouldn't be trying. Maybe I would try to go back and play football again, but that's a hard thing to do. It's football in general is a hard thing to do at the professional level. Doing it after a cardiac event is that's crazy to me. I mean,
it's unbelievable.
And it's such a credit and a testament to him and his mentality and who he is as a person to even attempt this and still do it and just go out there every week and it's awesome. I mean, it really is an amazing thing to see, and I seriously, genuinely hope that he's out there, that he is making plays, that he does exactly what he wants to do. Every time I see him in that uniform out on the field, it's just sort of surreal, that he's really out there. But good for him and good on him for really doing this and pushing himself to do that. I think it's just an amazing thing. Should we talk about corners?
Yeah, we probably should. Yeah.
Yeah. So Dane Jackson started, got an interception because Anthony Richardson just. I don't know about you, but as soon as I saw like this being where he threw the ball, like sidearm falling backwards, 1 foot, like just sort of I was like, that's not good. That's not gonna end well. And it didn't. But earlier interception early on the first drive, brought it down to like inside the 10 or whatever it was, and score quickly off of that. It's great. And then Kaiir Elam comes in later. He has a couple of penalties, grabby, which has been kind of his thing since college, is that he's a little grabby. And then Christian Benford comes in. I think he also got flagged as well at a certain point, maybe multiple times. The penalties were an issue, which is not like an uncommon thing for McDermott. I mentioned this in the recap, but it's still annoying when it happens as consistently as it did. And it is also preseason, and sometimes they do like to overemphasize certain points during the preseason, and then in the regular season it changes a little bit. But yeah, it was a little frustrating. Elam in particular. I mean, this whole quarterback competition has been a little frustrating at times, but it's also like it kind of just is what it is. Like, we know that they feel comfortable with veteran defensive backs, like a Dane Jackson or an EJ Gaines or Kevin Johnson or Levi Wallace. Like, Dane Jackson fits exactly that type of mold. This is the type of guy that they have generally felt comfortable with. But they drafted Kaiir Elam because they wanted to improve on comfortability. They wanted a higher level of play from that position. And Kaiir Elam will certainly give that to you at times, but he's also going to get a little too grabby, and he's going to have pass interference plays at times. And that's a tough thing. That's a tough sell as a player, or as a coach rather, to say like, hey, I'm going to put you out there all the time. And again, maybe I'm overemphasizing this idea too much, but 1 year, it was 2019 when they rotated Levi Wallace and Kevin Johnson, and for the most part, that worked pretty well. I always felt that Kevin Johnson was probably better than Levi Wallace that year, and didn't necessarily need to be rotated as much as he did, but they had their process, and that's just sort of the way they did it. And ultimately, they ended up playing pretty well overall. But you have Dane Jackson, and you know what you're getting with Dane Jackson. And with Elam, it's sort of like, is it better to just ride and die with Elam and let him get all of the experience that he can, and maybe he does end up adjusting from that experience? Or is it better to rotate with him and just sort of hope that you get more good plays out of him than bad plays in those circumstances?
Yeah, I the Bills think Dane Jackson's better. I think that's becoming what it is. The Bills
Yeah.
think Dane Jackson's the better player right now today. The Bills are going to play the better player today. And I know that frustrates fans because they see Kyrie Elam, a first round pick. They
Mhm.
expect him to be better than he is right now, but they also say, well, he needs the experience to get better. Well,
Right.
that's fine and all, but the Bills aren't going to play a player that's worse than a current player. Like that's just not going to happen.
Mhm.
I don't think. And Dane Jackson, he's the brunt of a lot of jokes. I believe people have to scapegoat somebody on the Bills defense, and they don't want to go after Micah. They don't want to go after Jordan. They don't want to go after
Yeah.
Trey. They don't want to go after Tehran, although they do sometimes. So they identify the weak link or the one that they're not as
Right.
familiar with, which happens to be Dane. I think Dane Jackson's a fine CB2 in the NFL. I wish Kyrie Elam was performing better. I wish he was,
Yep.
he cleared Dane Jackson, but right now he doesn't. And in all reality, I think Christian Benford's better than Kyrie Elam right now. Like that's my personal preference would be Dane 1 Dane 1, Benford 2, Elam 3,
Well,
which stinks.
I mean, the Bills felt that way last year when they started
Yeah.
Benford in
Yeah,
week
over
1.
Elam. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that was sort of how they felt. And, ultimately, what matters is having a workable CB2, right? In the end game, that's what matters. The frustration really is just that you spent a first round pick on Kyrie Elam trying to get a higher ceiling from this position. And now you're sort of stuck where you've been since this regime took over with just like, we're going to have Trey White on one side of the field or just, wherever he needs to be. And we'll have a CB2. And if they just sort of funnel their offense to that side of the field, so be it.
Yeah. I mean, and Dane is basically Levi. They're on the same level. Levi Wallace and Dane Jackson to me are the same caliber corner, which is a good corner, not a great corner. Like their ceiling is low, but their floor is Dane's floor is higher than Kyrie's floor to me right now. And I think that the Bills are banking on they don't want the floor. They would prefer the higher floor than the higher ceiling. That's where they are right now. And it makes frankly, it makes sense with this defense. You have Hyde and Poyer sitting back there as protection. I guess you could argue you could put Elam in because Hyde will protect him, but then that takes Hyde away from doing his thing.
But part of the problem is not necessarily that Elam is like giving up big plays or getting lost in coverage. It's just that he's got penalties. There's no covering up for penalties.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing you can do about that other than just not committing the penalties. But this is just Elam's style of play. It is what it is.
And it's been an issue in camp too, right? Like he got into it with Diggs and Dorsey had to talk to him. So the handsiness isn't just, the refs are calling him more harshly than other people are. The Bills have noticed it in camp and it's become an issue there. So there's a concern here with Elam. I think there's a legitimate concern.
I would agree with that. And it's tough, but it's also not to a point where it's going to sink this team, right?
No.
Because they have enough depth at that position where they'll be fine if Elam doesn't necessarily work out. It's just a frustrating thing to not have a first round pick work out. It's just that you don't want to have that happen more often than not. It's tough, and especially at a position where a lot of people have felt they needed to upgrade that spot to then invest some high capital in that spot. You feel like, all right, finally they did it. And it's like, oh, well, now we're kind of back where we were to start. And where did that bring you? Right back to me. It is what it is. But this is another thing that's going to be worth watching during this preseason is that Elam, Benford, Jackson rotation. And it'll be interesting to see if Jackson starts again against the Steelers. And let's talk about the Steelers just sort of quick here. Kenny Pickett seems fine. Seemed fine last year, all things considered. Like that offense wasn't very good last year, but for who Kenny Pickett was coming out of Pitt and going into that offense, played pretty well as a rookie. Not crazy good. He wasn't putting up crazy numbers or anything like that. But there were moments of like, okay, I get why you drafted Kenny Pickett. It is what it is. But I mean, the big thing really has been George Pickens, who is just, first of all, a very, very good player. And second of all, he definitely knows that he's a good player because he'll tell you all about it. Because there's something about having guys in the NFL that actively try to be the antagonist at any given point in their career. Where he'll hand the ball straight to you after he beats you. He's gonna just be right in your face the whole time. He's gonna block you. He's gonna jaw with you. He's gonna do it the whole time. And he does not care what anyone else thinks about him. This isn't even like a Richard Sherman who's like trying to very clearly get into people's heads, right? Like he's trying really hard to get into like George Pickens believes he is the alpha on it at any point. Like he's subservient to nobody. It's just like it's annoying when you play against players like that, but when you get to watch it from afar, it's just really fun, and it reminds you of like the sort of thing that makes the NFL just a lot of fun sometimes. It's just weird dudes like that, like him. Jair Alexander is another one of these dudes who is just like, this dude's a freaking weirdo, and like genuinely believes himself to be the greatest thing on God's green earth, and it's just nothing but pure entertainment sometimes.
I mean, you want to, just to throw this back to the Bills, you want to test Kaiir Elam? You put him on just man-to-man, one-on-one George Pickens. Do that this week. Let's see what Elam does. Let's see if he's grabbing. There might be a fist fight on the field, you know, with if he's grabbing at Pickens.
I want to see that now. I really want to
put Elam on Pickens.
But it's not just George Pickens on that offense. You have Najee Harris, who was a disappointment last year, and I don't think that was necessarily all of his fault. The offensive line wasn't great. You know, obviously having to work with Mitch Trubisky and a rookie quarterback, not the most ideal situation for a running back. It's tough. But you also have Deontay Johnson, who legitimately might be one of the more underrated players, especially at his position. That dude just knows how to get open. I mean, it is crazy how good he is as a route runner, how good he is at separating from coverage. He's had some struggles with drops, but to me, and maybe this is just me, but I feel like his play outside of those drops is fun. It's good, and I think more than makes up for the couple of drops that he has. And I think that got kind of overblown when he was like in his first and second year, and now it's just sort of a narrative that follows him. I think he's a lot better than people realize. I think he's a far better player than people realize. And I think him and George Pickens is such a great combination for a young quarterback to have. You have one guy who just gets open seemingly on every play, and another guy who it doesn't really matter if he's open because he could just catch the ball at any point on the field. It's such a great thing to have as a rookie. And then you also have Pat. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, while you're saying this, I hope people on here realize, like, I think the Steelers are winning the AFC North. I've been very outspoken of that on Twitter. I think
which is crazy, but go on.
I think this team is legit. I don't even think Kenny Pickett's that good. That's not why I think they're winning that division. So, but yeah, no, Deontay Johnson and George Pickens, that's a solid, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2. Yeah. Like, that's a decent duo in the NFL. And then, Allen Robinson struggled last year. He was not good on the Rams, but there's still some talent there. He's their wide receiver 3. I'd take that as my wide receiver 3. And then you were just bringing up Pat Freiermuth. He's probably he's probably borderline top 10 tight end. He might be top 10. And then their offensive line. I like their offense enough, but their defense is ridiculous. Their defense is going to be legit this year.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, that defense is just they just find a way to build these defenses. And like, this is not even like an overly talented defense, I would say. Right? Like, first of all, they've been very fortunate with the fact that Cam Hayward has aged like wine. Where he's 33 or something like that and still playing at an all-pro, Pro Bowl type of level. It's crazy how good he has been in the latter stages of his career. You still have TJ
Future Hall
Watt,
of Famer.
who's
Future Hall of Famer.
truly, genuinely. You still have TJ Watt. They drafted Keanu Benton, who our very own Anthony Prohaska, Disguised Coverage, watch on Wednesday nights, really loved Keanu Benton. And just today, I saw Brandon Thorne tweet about Keanu Benton, and I was like, when Brandon Thorne tweets about someone, I have to pay attention now. And, when you have a good line, when you have good offensive line play and you have good defensive line play, that keeps you in games. That will make you competitive in games. That's just true from high school on up. But the Steelers, I mean, who do they have at linebacker?
So that's people don't know him at all or know him very well. Cole Holcomb, he's from the Commanders.
Okay.
He's just a absolute ball. He knows where the ball is at all times. He's just there to make tackles, and he's just going to tackle. He's an upgrade over what Devin Bush was. Was
what a disappointment. Oh my gosh. I liked Devin Bush coming out. I thought he was like aggressive, tenacious, good tackler. Mm-hmm. He was none of those things for the Steelers. He was just not good. And they traded up to get him. They traded like 11 or 12 spots up to get Devin Bush. It was rough. That was Devin White and Devin Bush, both just like really good prospects. Both of them are bad right now. Like those are just two bad players. It's unfortunate, but so Cole Holcomb, okay, like Cole Holcomb is fine. I don't know. It's just that you still have Minka. They have Levi Wallace. They have Akella Witherspoon, right? Is still on the team at corner.
I don't think he is. I don't see him. I have the depth chart up. I don't see him. They have Patrick Peterson.
Who's Patrick Peterson?
He's got to be too old. But Joey Porter Jr.
Oh, that's right, Joey Porter Jr. God. Yeah, I mean, there's as a younger Sean McDermott once said, there are players on this team, and like I don't believe in the Steelers the same way that you do, but we also forgot about Alex Highsmith, the other edge player outside of TJ Watt, who I don't know if I would have given him that contract that they ended up giving him, but he's a good player. Like, he's definitely a good player. And having a good pass rush makes up for the fact that your corners may not be the most top-tier players in the NFL right now. And, of course, you have Minka Fitzpatrick, who's fantastic and, covers up a lot for them, I think.
I'll just add this last point on why I think the Steelers – they went 9-8 last year. Their team was not very good. TJ Watt was playing half broken for only half the season. Yeah. He should be fully healthy this year. They went 9-8, and they're always a thorn in Joe Burrow's side. He stinks against the Steelers. The Steelers to Joe Burrow are what the Jets are to Josh Allen. Josh Allen's never really played well against the Jets. That's why I think a lot of Jets fans are on this kind of idea that this is the Jets' year. I truly think that this is the Steelers' year, just because who even knows if Burrow's going to play week 1 or week 2 or week 3? What is the Ravens going to be? I don't know if I believe in their wide receivers. Like, the Steelers went 9-8 with the team they had last year. I trust that they're going to be better than that this year. If they go 10-7, that might be enough to win the North.
Interesting. It's an interesting case. I still don't buy it all the way, but it's much more interesting than maybe I thought. And regardless of what I think the Steelers' ceiling is, they're always just going to be a tough and competitive team because it's Mike Tomlin, and God forbid he do anything other than
go
500. It's just so annoying. So I'm looking forward to this matchup. Do you think Allen or Diggs or both will be in this game, or do you think they hold off on that until week 3?
I don't want them playing at all this preseason.
But at some point, I think that they will if the pass is any indication.
I mean, if they do play, it's going to be quick pass, quick pass, quick pass. I don't even know if they'll target Diggs, or if they do, it'll be an out route to keep him safe. I think I'd rather it be this week than week 3 in case there's any nicks. Give me an extra week. So that being said, probably going to be this week. They're probably going to play.
All right, fair enough. That's pretty much gonna do it for us tonight. If you haven't already, hit the like button, leave a comment, leave a good night. You can subscribe to YouTube. You can subscribe pretty much anywhere you get this podcast, wherever, whatever platform you're listening to this on. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in every week. It's great. And if you're looking for another way to support us, please consider our subscription service, One Pass. For $57 a year, you get exclusive content just for One Pass members. You get scouting reports, you get all sorts of analysis, you get access to Greg Thompson's series about the salary cap if you ever want to figure out how that actually works and how teams are able to use it and manipulate it. It's really interesting. You get access to the Cover One Slack channel, which if you're somebody who's on Twitter and maybe you don't like using Twitter. By the way, I refuse to call it X. It's Twitter until my phone updates, which it never will because I refuse to do it. If you're sick of using Twitter on game days, if you're sick of seeing all these dumb narratives and these national reporters who don't know what they're talking about, go to this Cover One Slack channel on game days. It is so much better. It's so much more worth it. It's kind of worth it. Just the $57 a year, honestly, is kind of worth it just for that. But then you get all this other stuff, plus a nice t-shirt and a decal that you can stick on, your car, maybe your forehead, your bike. I don't know what people do with decals. But yeah, if you're that type of person, that sounds like a good thing for you. $57 a year. You're not going to get better football content for that type of money anywhere else, essentially. And I genuinely, truly believe that. And we're always very, very grateful and thankful to everyone who is a part of the Cover One Pass subscription. We love every single one of you, and we just love every one of our fans. We're glad that everyone's here. And again, like, comment, subscribe, all that wonderful stuff. Leave a 5-star review on iTunes, on Spotify, etc. It really helps everything out. Yeah, I think that's going to be it. Uber, where can the people find you on the lovely Bird app?
Yeah, on the Twitter, you can find me at UberHansen, tweeting about all things Bills and alcohol related. And then also just throwing this out there, Wednesday, the second part of my series scouting the AFC East will drop. And this week it'll be the big in-depth coverage of the Dolphins, and found some really interesting things, positive and negative, about this team.
It's if you haven't seen Uber's piece on the Patriots that he did last week, read it. It's great. He does great work. It's really worth reading. This week's going to be worth reading. Next week about the Jets is going to be worth reading. Good stuff. You all can find me at DFAUXY or at DFoxy on Twitter. You'll find a whole bunch of very lukewarm takes about the Bills and maybe some slightly inebriated and emotional ones at times. That's going to be it for us. Thank you for joining. Bye-bye.